have 8C1 for ASA and 8C2 from, for a donation from OEF. I would like to propose, as already noted, it's already in the board agenda, and I think the ones that have been copied out, but adding item policy GE under policies, item 8E2. I would like to propose adding hiring of staff, 2 staff positions, which would be under action items 8A. Do we have anybody here from those positions?
Yes.
So we should move those positions up then. So I would like to propose moving positions 8A. What do you think after the reports? Or even before the report? Okay, so I would like to propose moving 8A staff nominations to immediately after public comment. And I would like to take 8D, and as we usually do, since they're not, propose moving those down to after number 14. And I believe, and the last thing is I would like to propose moving 6C, student presentations, to the first presentation before superintendent and principals. So that is quite a rehash of the agenda, but that is my motion. Is there a second of that motion?
I'll second.
Is there any discussion of those changes? All those in favor? Okay, and if I'm skipping something that we just changed, please interrupt me and remind me. Next up, we have consideration of the minutes from May 29th. I would make a motion to adopt the minutes as presented. Is there any discussion?
I will second.
Any discussion? Okay. I just noticed my name is misspelled a few times, but I'm sure that's just a typo. Any other discussion or changes? All those in favor? Okay.
Brian McGill.
Aaron, you didn't vote. Are you abstaining or? Okay. All right. So that passed 4-0. That's all right. Just wanted to be clear. Next up, we have warrants. I would make a motion to approve warrants 23, 24, 24 payroll, and May purse. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Is there any discussion of the warrants?
Does it matter that 23 is not on the agenda?
Or is it printed wrong in the agenda?
Well, there's four in the folder, and there's only 3 on the agenda. So.
If I'm remembering correctly, 23 was supposed to come last week.
We didn't get 23 last week, so
Oh, that's right.
that's, we were not required to advertise warrants on the agenda, so the motion would prevail.
Okay.
Is there a second on the motion with 4 warrants?
I will second.
Any discussion on the warrants? All those in favor? Okay. Next up is acknowledgements. You want to start, Aaron? We don't have to, I mean, it's a busy night, so we don't have to struggle for them. but-
I'm gonna pass.
Jake?
I'm going to do a pre-acknowledgement of Susical coming this
Hmm.
weekend, Friday and Saturday.
It's a novel strategy to not get beaten to the acknowledgements.
Yeah, I'm gonna start acknowledging stuff before it happens.
Excellent.
So, no, Keith, am I correct? It's a Friday night and a couple performances Saturday?
Yeah, we actually have 4 total, so we're doing one on Friday, 5 total. One Friday for Brewer, they're bringing our kindergarten class, and we have our kindergartners and pre-K coming up. And then there's one Friday evening, 2 on Saturday, and then they're gonna perform for the school as well, the following week, so 5, yep.
Great. I know there's lots and lots of people working really hard towards the end of the year, but I'm not going to make any specific acknowledgements except for all that hard work. Meredith?
I'm gonna let Mark go, so I don't steal what he might be saying.
I just want to acknowledge the 4th, 5th grade concert at ASA. That was very well done. Kids were great, and all the hard work that went on from not only the music teachers, but also all of the teachers who were there helping to kind of keep order was pretty impressive. So thank you.
Can I make one,
Go ahead.
I know that it's happening right now, but Asa Adams PTO is doing Moe's tonight, it's Spirit Night. So after the meeting, or if you're at home watching, you could go right now. Go to Moe's.
Great. And student acknowledgements.
I think anything we have will be included in our report.
Okay. And I would just add one more. I missed it because I was at a facilities committee meeting, but I heard there was a great ukulele concert at the high school last night. All right,
I'll add one.
Meredith.
So I'd like to acknowledge in advance, because it's gonna be a while before we meet again, the work that Lisa Earhart does to put together the fifth grade slideshow and celebration. I was in a training with her today, so I've heard her talking about what's been going on with getting that ready, and I know it's a significant effort, but it's appreciated by many, so I wanted to acknowledge her work on that.
Okay, next up, we have public comment. Would anybody like to make a public comment? Couple people. Okay. And just before we dive in, I just want to remind people of the basic ground rules. General comments are welcome. We're not actually allowed by policy or law to make specific complaints against individuals here tonight, so any references should be generic. Specific complaints are, of course, accepted and welcome through the proper channels, but just general comments tonight, please. Thanks. Go ahead, Alan.
So I'm Alan Kubo Lewis. I have two kids at Orono High School. And my general comment is to remind the school board that a number of years ago, the school district gave itself and its students a black eye in the way it dealt with a transgender student who was bullied. Subsequent to that, this board passed a progressive transgender student policy, ACAA-A. And I want to thank the school board for passing that policy. It was very good. And subsequently, the school board revised the policy and made it even better. And I want to thank the school board for that as well. The policy, in my opinion, has not always been followed this year. And I'm not going to get into details, but I would suggest that the school board might want to look into whether the policy could be refined, and might want to look into whether there is adequate training of personnel at the schools. Because if the policy had been followed, then it would have been a more welcoming environment and a safer environment this year than it was. In a lot of ways, the environment is very good. I'm not trashing the schools, but there were a few failures to implement the policy, and those detracted from the students' environment this year.
Thank you. And just to be clear, I hope I didn't squash your comments. You're welcome to mention specific circumstances, just not specific individual names.
Okay. I think that the circumstances really revolve around, I think, around students' preferred names, which under school board policy is what should be used, unless there's a requirement to use legal name. And that has not always been followed. Yearbooks were printed with students' non-preferred names this year, so there was a very public outing of a number of students. And there were some other instances when class roles were used in a number of public ways, used by classes, for example, in doing their assignments, where the legal names were used. You may want to think about putting into place policies or procedures that essentially mask database fields from access by people who ought not to have access to them, because to rely on individuals to always make the right changes isn't really fair, because it's very easy to make a mistake. So I think I think there's a number of policies that you might want to consider. I don't want to spend a lot of my public comment going into it, except to just raise the issue, and to say that it's going to take a bit more work for the board to ensure that it's really very progressive policy is actually has its intended effect. Thanks.
Thank you. Other public comment? Yes, please. Can you come up to the mic?
My comments are along the same line. Good evening. My name is Umbreen Rana, and I am the president of the Maine Transgender Network. So I'm here to speak in support of transgender and gender nonconforming students, both here in Orono and those across the state. And I'm hoping the state will follow your lead this evening. In addition to guaranteeing Maine's LGBTQ+ youth the right to a discrimination-free education, Maine law explicitly requires public schools in Maine to respect their gender identities, presentations, names, and pronouns of all transgender students, and cis students as well. This law, directly connected to the actions of the school district, serves to ensure safe and affirming educational and extracurricular opportunities of the school district. It's, and not just for transgender youth. I want to make sure that you know that it's also for all students in the state of Maine. Keeping the school district compliant with this law is an essential function to the school board body. But beyond the letter of the law, this body has the opportunity to speak to a moment in the lives of these students and to our culture. Transgender people, especially students, are under attack. Varied political and cultural forces have put targets on their backs, often scoring points by belittling their lives of vulnerable youth. By misgendering and misnaming transgender students, you invalidate their experiences, devalue their humanity, and make clear that the school and this community do not want them. And I know that's not true. I know that you want them, especially because of the policies that I just heard about that you put in place to protect them. Those are so important, and I greatly appreciate those. But this evening, you have an opportunity to go against the tide of hate and invalidation. I ask you to please support school policies that respect the chosen names of transgender students. By doing so, you are claiming that these students are respected and valued members of your community. You will ensure that these students grow into adulthood and move on with their lives, that they will know that they have a school in town that loves them and supports them, and they are welcome to return to that town. They will remember that in the moment of political strife and conflict in our culture, you all took the risk of joining with them and saying that they are belonged and loved. So I do have the laws that do protect those students if you'd like a copy of them. And I greatly appreciate that you have policies that support them. And like my friend said, I just want to echo everything that he said, that it's really important to abide by those policies. So if you'd like
Thank you.
those laws,
Yep.
I can bring them.
We
your
would love to
secretary?
have them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Should I?
Maybe you can just leave them with Lynn. Thank you.
you.
Any other public comment?
Hi, I'm Lori Osher. I'm a resident of Orono. I live on Mayo Street. And I'm pleased that I did not have experiences in high school where I was not treated with respect. I had great high school experience. But as an adult, as a working person who's representative of minorities, various minorities that have that sometimes people are rude to. So I'm an out lesbian and I'm a Jew, and I have been in various workplaces where my civil rights have been violated by people in my workplace. And when those civil rights were violated by people in my workplace, the people who were in charge of censuring or making it clear that that was unacceptable behavior did not do their job. So I'm here because I support students who right to choose what names they would be called by. I support your policy where you have said that that is the rules of the school, and I'd like you to make it clear to the people who have not followed through with that policy that's unacceptable, and there should be some kind of either consequence or, as Alan was saying, you should set up the system differently so it's not so easy to be rude and to people and undermine their civil rights. So I look to you as a board that's in charge of our schools to make sure that this doesn't happen again, and the people who have put this problem in place for us to discuss, understand that that's unacceptable behavior and will not be tolerated in our town.
Thank you. I think at this point, I'd like a quick consensus of the board. As you may have already seen, this topic is going to come up in the student report. I'm thinking it might be logical to just have that portion of the student report at this point in time to have continuity of the topic with the board. Is there any disagreement with that? Okay, would the students like to make their presentation on this particular point? We'll come back to the rest of your report during the regularly scheduled time. Oh, sorry, before we jump into that, was there any other public comment? Okay, thank you. Please go ahead.
We want to bring to the attention of the board a problem with the yearbooks. All transgender students with student plans that specified use of a preferred name had their legal names used in the yearbook. This was humiliating, a violation of respect, and a safety issue, in that it outed some of these students to the whole school.
We also want to bring attention that we know this was not just a matter of it never being thought about. We know this for multiple reasons. First of all, the use of preferred names in the yearbooks was written in some students' plans that implied students would be at the very least notified of proceedings, which multiple students have claimed they were not. Verbal promises were also made to students that were not respected. Furthermore, I know for a fact that one student was asked to bring in a note to have their preferred name used in the yearbook, while the other students were not, which implies that the school was aware that this was an issue that they needed to address. And the student in question did bring in their note, and their name was not included in the yearbook as under their preferred name. And finally, students who were working on the yearbook questioned and advocated for the inclusion of preferred names multiple times, and were repeatedly told by adults that that was not possible. So we know that it's a fact of it not just being overlooked, but the school was aware of the issue and made a conscious decision to use legal names and not preferred names in the yearbook. And second, we also know of, since the issue has come up, some defenses that we've heard from the school that we would like to address. First of all, people working on the yearbook were told after the situation came to light that students on the yearbook committee, the yearbook class, should defend their decision to other students because board policy had not gone into effect by the time that the yearbook was submitted. We know that this is not a true statement for two reasons. First of all, the section in question had been in effect since June 21st, 2016, and which is super obvious. But second, we know that the most recent things that were included in the yearbook came from March 24th or a later date, and that policy was passed on March 6th. So we know that students were in some way given misinformation about why this decision was made, because it was not true that the policy was not in effect. And a second argument the school has used is that yearbooks were a legal document and therefore legal names had to be used. This is also, as far as we know, false. The policy states, to the extent that the school is not required to use a student's legal name or gender on school records or other documents, the school should use the name and gender identified in the student's plan. There is no law that we are aware of requiring legal names to be used in a yearbook. Furthermore, the school at this point has stated that they will replace the yearbooks on official file, invalidating their argument that the yearbooks were official documents in which legal names should be used. So I just want to be clear that the school has so far attempted to defend their decision to students in two ways that are not true or honest to us.
So far, the school has agreed to reprint yearbooks for students affected and those on official file. They've also promised that this will not happen again and have apologized for the situation. However, this was not a simple mistake. There were clearly chances to avoid this problem that were not taken. There also have been separate issues with names in the past. This is a situation in which a simple apology and pledge to change in the future is not enough. It's humiliating, violating, victimizing, and affects the safety of students. This is a direct violation of a school board policy. It is also a potential violation of state law through the Maine Human Rights Commission, which has ruled that schools must respect transgender student rights.
We just wanted to bring, this is through research we have done, talking to people involved in the situations, people on yearbook committee, students affected. I know I can't names about who I got the sources from, but if I think that's something we can do in an executive session, in which I'd be willing to do. And these are all fairly irrefutable facts that we have found.
Okay, thank you. Were you done? So just to bring up a little bit of clarity, the addressing of an issue of a behavior of a particular employee under state and federal law is protected by privacy, so the appropriate process is to file a complaint. In many cases, the complaint would be with the Equal Employment Officer. I think in this case, it might be with Meredith. And if there is, if satisfactory resolution is not brought at that level, and there is a right to bring a complaint to the board, at which point the board would go into executive session. Both the complainant and anybody who's being complained about would have a right to be present in that executive session, but it would be confidential to the larger public. So that's where we stand at that. As far as I know, I know Meredith has been looking into some things, but as far as I know, we are not through the formal process of a complaint and not having reached a satisfactory resolution with the superintendent. So that would be the next step as far as that process of discussion. For the board, we might also be able to meet in executive session relating to legal counsel, since both Meredith and I have spoken to legal counsel about this issue. Not advocating that, but I'm just giving you that information. I would like to thank the community members for speaking. I would like to thank the students for speaking. That was a very clear and articulate presentation. I think maybe both Meredith and I might have a couple of comments. I'm going to just jump in if that's okay, and then you're welcome to add anything you want. I would just like to say that I recognize what a big deal this is. Yearbooks are supposed to be a time of warm glow of connection with your peer students. I think most of us adults sitting up here have that memory of the time when we got our yearbooks and went around and got them signed. And I deeply regret that option had a strong emotional negative context injected into it by this particular outcome. I also fully recognize that this has issues of safety involved. The transgender population is subject to physical abuse when outed, and that's effectively what those yearbooks did, was out several students. The transgender population has also got one of the highest suicide rates of any population out there, and that, as I understand it, is typically a consequence of trickle, not recognition of the identity and self-affirmation of those students, and this contributed to that as well. I want to clearly state that what happened is a contradiction and a violation of the policy that this board adopted in June of 2016 with language, which not coincidentally was designed to be consistent with state law under the Maine Human Rights Act, as was brought up by a speaker. So it therefore was inconsistent with policy, was also inconsistent with state law. I know it directly affected several students in the sense that they were the ones in the yearbook, but I think it's also important to note that it had wider effects. There are other transgender students who, for various reasons of timing at arrival of school and so forth, might not have been in the yearbook this year, but I'm sure they paid a lot of attention to what happened, and I regret the consequences it had for them. And I also think it's a question of modeling for the community and for all the students in the high school that we failed at as adults. As of today, I haven't heard anything that leads me to believe there was intentional discrimination happening, and I know many of the individuals involved, and I've had other conversations that don't suggest to me there was intentional discrimination, but I think it's important to recognize that, as was just noted by the students, this was not something that was just accidentally forgotten. This was an issue that was brought up repeatedly, both by the students directly affected and also by other students in the high school, and so there was an intentional decision made. So I think that's important. And I have to say, I just am never going to understand what compelling interest we had. On one side, we had a policy, we had a law, we had a strong interest of students, and I'm just never going to understand what was on the other side of that balance for this decision. As far as future steps, I think it's very important, as several people have said, that this district be proactive in addressing this issue and ensuring it not happen again, and that we redress as much as possible at this point what happened. I have asked the superintendent to investigate on her own. That's not a formal sense of investigation in the sense I was just talking about earlier, but I know she's already done that. I think given what's come up, it would also be good to have the superintendent collect information from the students more directly. As was mentioned, I think it's important that we fix the yearbooks to the extent possible, whatever the cost. I also think, as Ben mentioned, it's important that we have a visitation through the board and probably through the policy subcommittee about our processes of who decides when legal names have to be used. As far as I know, as was mentioned in the policy, it's only when we're required by law to use a legal name, and those are very limited circumstances, things like transcripts, things like standardized tests, and they're not other circumstances, but I think we need to find some way in which decisions about that are made in a way that are more robust and less prone to mistakes. And I think we need to have additional training to make sure that people understand the full nature of the policy. So those are all actions I'm going to be looking to pursue over the coming time. And lastly, I would just like to say, I would personally, and on behalf of the board, I'll let the board speak for themselves, but I would like to personally and on behalf of the district apologize to the students that were affected by this. I know there's no way we can directly fix in full this problem, but I deeply regret it happened, and I'm embarrassed and sad it happened on my watch, and I apologize.
Thank you. So I would like to just add, much has been said here tonight. I think that, as Brian indicated, we are in the midst of an investigation. I think I agree with what Brian has said about, I won't comment about the details of the investigation, but it does not appear that there is malintent on the part of any individual, but I am not done with the investigation, so when I conclude, I'll provide a report to the board so you can see the findings. I would say words at this point may seem inadequate to apologize to affected individuals, but as Brian did, I too just sincerely apologize to affected individuals and the people who care about them, because it's clear that this didn't just affect these students, it affected, trust in our larger community. So I mainly apologize to these students, but also to the kind of the collateral community around them who care about them. Additionally, moving forward, twofold, trying to determine, other than sincere apologies, ideas from individuals involved about how to rectify the wrong right now, and then also how to prevent future occurrences of this kind of mistake. I would say that policy work is something we need to really dive into on this. I think training is something that we need to work more on around this. And I think that, when I look around the state, there aren't, I would say there are more districts that don't have policies like this in place still than do. But I think just having the policy is insufficient, because there are places in the policy that require for staff, administrators to make judgments about how to interpret policy. And I think this is one where we need to be as clear and specific as we can, so that we can avoid situations like this in the future. So I think that policy work and training are key. We are working with council, as Brian indicated, and we'll develop a response based on our findings and consulting with council when we have a report. So that's what
Thank you. Anybody else on the board?
I'm sorry, did you say that we have the option of going into executive session under a certain subset to discuss the matter?
The investigation's not complete. I think we probably could do it under consultation with advice from a lawyer, since both Meredith and I have received advice from a lawyer on this context.
I would prefer that if that's okay.
Go ahead and make a motion then.
Do you know which one? I was looking through
It's
this list and I.
4056F, I believe. Want to just
456F. All right, so I would like to make a motion to go into executive session pursuant to MRSA 4056F.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion?
Just question, is this just the 4 board members?
Since this is pertaining to legal liabilities, this would just be the board members, yep.
May I add a few comments then first before that happens?
I suppose, let's just call that part of the discussion since the motion's been made. Go ahead.
I'd just like to say that something we had talked about is students are already having their yearbooks reprinted. We feel as if they should get a refund, that this has been an overwhelmingly negative process and they should not have to pay for it. Also, obviously, we can make a copy of our report available to the investigation, since we talked to a lot of students at this point. I think I have a general understanding from the student side, at least, of how this went down. And just, I would like to just put the question out there about what is the board going to do to make sure that this can't happen again?
Okay, thanks. We really don't have provision to go into public comment. Since we have a motion on the floor, I think we'll take a vote on executive session. If the board's amenable, I'm open to hearing more public comment when we come back, but we'll see about that when we come back. So all those in favor of going to executive session? Okay. right, we're coming back out of executive session at 6:45 PM. I think first what I would like to hear is if there are any other comments from board members. Their need.
Yeah, I just want to comment that I'm fully supportive of both the comments that Brian and Meredith made, and my deepest apologies to any students affected on this. I was under the impression that the policy we put in place was clear, that we took these matters seriously, and that we had put in place every safeguard to prevent such occurrences, and I regret that the policy did not have the intended effect in this case. So I think that the policy subcommittee will definitely put that at the top of its agenda and go back and see how we might be able to strengthen the policy even further and ensure that what is there is followed in both the spirit and the letter of the policy. So
I would just echo what Mark has said and apologize for everyone who's been affected in a negative manner.
Yeah, I'm tragically sorry that this happened, and I think we'll do everything we can to address it.
Yeah, I'll just note from afar, I'm really sorry too, and I think I'm now protected. I'm really sorry as well, and we will do everything we can to try to help. So my deepest apologies.
Any other students? Yeah, come on up, Russ.
I would just like to say that based off of these events, we need to ensure that there is something that happens to make sure that the correct name is spoken for students, their preferred names at underclassmen awards, book awards, and graduation. There isn't enough time to really do much about school policy between then and now, but we need to ensure that happens.
I agree. Thank you.
Is that best addressed to you, or is that addressed to school administrators?
I think it's been noted. They're all here in the room.
I just think I would like to add one more thing, which is that the yearbook is the most blatant and obvious version of this, but there have been other cases in the past year too. Probably the next biggest one is the other cases of the legal names instead of preferred names being used. The most obvious one is stats. The AP stats class does a final project where they conduct I guess experiment of sorts, and they're given class rosters to create their, I don't know, I'm not in the class exactly, but to create their samples and pick which students they will conduct their experiments on. And those class rosters included legal names, not preferred names also, which is another example of a very widespread correct use of the names.
Yeah, we deal with this at the university too. It's there's many places this comes up, and I think we will need to be much more proactive in being clear about that. Just to reiterate the policy and my understanding of the law is, unless there's a law explicitly requiring us to use a legal name, and the only places I'm aware of that existing are the transcript and standardized testing, then the student's preferred name will be used. And that's a pretty black and white. Basically, there's two places where we have to use the legal name, and in every other case, we are expected by policy and by law to use the student's preferred name. So, and those two are only because we're required by law to do differently. Is the board open to any closing public comments on this issue? Okay, would anybody like to make additional public comments? Laurie?
I greatly appreciate the support of the school board on this issue and on your statements of disappointment that this happened. But I heard from both the chair of the school board and the superintendent something that was concerning, which is that you said that both of you were sure that the intent was not to do harm. So there was harm done, and the impact is significant. And when someone has violated a policy, whatever their intent, that needs to be addressed. And by both of you stating out loud that you didn't think that there was intent, it discounts all of the great value I heard, all the valuable statements that I heard you say about how tragic this is. Because this is, and Eli has pointed out, this is not a one-time occurrence, and this happening is an indication that policies by some can be avoided and then have a huge impact on people. And that's what I'm looking to you as a school board, to focus on the impact and focus on the ways that that can be reduced, because as soon as you start talking about intent, we can all say we're not racist, but we're in a racist culture, and there are things that we do that we don't realize have a negative impact because we are steeped in this world that we're in that is racist. And we're white, so we don't notice things. So you have to look at the very same way in this, which is when you focus on intent, you undermine your credibility as someone who's trying to change the culture here, because this is a cultural decision to ignore a policy. That's my again, as a person who has experienced civil rights violations repeatedly in places where the first comment is, oh, well, that wasn't the intent. So let's just focus on the impact and changing the behavior.
Thank you for your comment. We don't get in a big back and forth. I'm just going to say I don't think you accurately represented what I actually said. If you go back and look at the record. Alan, please go ahead.
Sure, I'm going to be brief. And I just wanted to say that I appreciate all the time that the board is putting into this. I appreciate hearing from Eli and the students about AP stats. That's the kind of issue that I had in mind when I said that you need to think about making your databases not have these fields available. There's a couple of reasons. One is that it prevents violations when you're physically unable to access the field. I would definitely talk through with some professionals and some students as well, because students have brought to my attention that some students may find themselves outed if they use the name in a yearbook that they use at school. So there has to be a way for looping students into specific decisions, and maybe have some calculated field that's contingent on contingent on the student's choice of which name to use. But the other thing that like making making your database hide fields that should not have access to any non-authorized personnel, it also gives the clear message that this school takes this seriously. It basically has the effect of also essentially changing the culture of really taking it seriously. In addition to things like someone puts their attendance list up on overhead. Everyone's legal name is there unless basically the electronics prevent that from happening. And that's the kind of thing that people can do without even knowing that they're doing it. That's a case where clearly intent is not even on the table when you just put your class list up. Just like professors post the grades, not realizing that their social security number is there. Same kind of thing. The university had to work really hard to make sure that social security numbers were not available for anyone to post accidentally. So I actually have spoken longer than I intended, so thanks for your time.
Thank you. Lots of good suggestions. Would you like to be notified when we discuss this in policy subcommittee?
Thank you. I would love to be.
We'll do that. Go ahead.
Thank you. So I just wanted to reiterate what Meredith said about trainings. Trainings for your staff members and also for your students is so important, so that they know how to work the best way with transgender students and how to make the school the most affirming and safe place that it can possibly be. So I can connect you with people that will train you. I've done it for multiple schools. I also want to say that I have worked with both John Baptist Memorial High School and Bangor High School on advising them on changing the school roster system, so the attendance list, so that it's easier to make sure that a student's nickname is what it says on the system, because it's not updated, but of course that's the student's chosen name, shows up on attendance lists rather than their dead name being the name they were given at birth. So there are ways to do it, and it's a simple update of the system. And it will make it so that when there's substitute teachers, that they will get the correct student roster And when there are things like AP projects that print out rosters, it'll be easy to just print it out. So there are ways to do this. Because there are other ways that we're missing, like in the lunch line with a lot of systems, since they're changed to electronic systems. For a lot of schools, the student's dead name shows up when they go through the lunch line. That can be really embarrassing. So there are ways to update the system. And trainings are really important, so thank you, Meredith, for bringing that up. So I am gonna leave my contact information so that we can work on this together. And I do just wanna say that to the students, you brought up some amazing articulate points, and I really appreciate you, so thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Either one?
I just want to say that I think we do need to, at least, what I would, I'm not one of the students affected, but what as someone who's been in the high school and watched this whole thing happen, would definitely say that we need more training. That I've talked to teachers who, admittedly, maybe these teachers missed things for some reason or another, but I've talked to teachers who said they only remember it coming up once in a teacher, I forget what they're called, but the teacher meetings that happen every so often. And perhaps it was a teacher that's more recent, but just being careful that this actually does get properly given out to the teachers and the people who are implementing the policies, and that that there maybe needs to be some review of the system to make sure there aren't things slipping through the loopholes.
Great. Lots of very good suggestions here. I appreciate all of them, and we will be working to follow through on this. Thank you. Anything else? All right, should we move forward? Not that we're done with this topic, but for tonight, I think we'll move on. Next up, we bumped up 8A staff nominations. Meredith, do you want to?
Oh, did we? Okay, yes. We're not doing the rest of the presentations.
No.
Okay.
Yep.
Sorry.
We are.
Right.
We're going to come back after. We've just already been here an hour. I'd like to get the people here for the staff nominations settled.
So I'll start by nominating, who's listed first? For our GT coordinator, Karen Fry. So I assume we are going into executive session.
Okay.
As our policy.
Yep. I'll make a motion to go into executive session under 1 MRSA 4056A. Appointment of officials or employees. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor? Okay.
Sharon,
All right, we're back from executive session at 7:05. And I would make a motion to approve the hire as nominated by the superintendent. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Congratulations.
Congratulations. Now we have another nomination.
So I'd like to nominate Jennifer Branchflower for the OHS Science and STEM teaching position.
Okay. I'll make motion to go into executive session under 1 MRSA 4056A, appointment of personnel. Is there a second?
I will second that.
Any discussion? All those in favor? That's not.
There must be something wrong with the town system.
Probably again. All right, come out of executive session at 7:15 PM and make a motion to approve the nomination of Jennifer Branchflower as the STEM teacher at OHS. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Congratulations. Next up, I'm scanning my chicken scratched agenda here. I think we are now returning to our regularly scheduled monthly reports. So we'll start with the superintendent.
So I wanted to highlight some big events we have coming up. I know in the principal reports, they have a number of events across their buildings, but for the board in particular, you know, you're invited to our end-of-year activities, and specifically want to extend an invitation to the baccalaureate and senior awards, which are 2 nights from now, Thursday night, in the gym at 6:30, and then graduation on Sunday at 7 p.m. at the Collins Center. Additionally, I wanted to just do a quick brief update on the facilities committee. We had a meeting last night, and PDT was present to deliver really a pretty big piece of their work they've been developing, and both Brian and Aaron are on that committee. I had a couple of extra copies that I've provided to Mark and Jake. The document is called the Space Program Analysis, and really it's taking our current facility and how we're using it, and how many square feet are in each room, and how many students are served in that room, and then putting that against our projections based on our enrollment study, and also what they know about facility needs in general in schools, and also what they know to be the stakeholder feedback they've heard so far, and have added in elements that they feel are missing, spaces they feel are missing, and that's what's highlighted in yellow there. So I just wanted to kind of make sure you had that document. It's something we're really going to be working quite a bit through as a committee. We're going to have another meeting in a couple of weeks, and it's something that we'll be using as a board in the fall to probably frame some of our discussion. So I just wanted to give you that, and if you'd like to sit down and talk with me, or you know, Brian and Aaron also are on the committee, we can sit down and have that discussion. We also need to appoint another student representative to the facilities committee, because our student rep is graduating. It was Becca who was volunteered for that, so we need to have another student step forward. So if there's some interest in that, let me know. And if there's more than one person, then we can figure out how we're going to determine the student who will be the rep. Also, I want to just remind the public about the June 12th budget referendum. It's next Tuesday that's coming up, so we'd like for the community to come out and vote, and certainly those who are in support of the school community and school budget, we'd love to have your support in the vote next week. Several of us attended a training today that was held locally, sponsored by the Penobscot Emergency Management Association, and it was in partnership with the Department for Homeland Security. It was an active shooter training designed for public, governments, and some healthcare setting individuals, and it was really a great training, and it really goes well with the work we've been doing all year on updating our emergency preparedness plan. So it really kind of helped us get recommendations in this field are constantly changing. Every time there is a major event, you know, there's reflection and often new recommendations in the field, and so going to these kind of trainings really helps us to make sure we're hearing the most recent recommended strategies and approaches from professionals. So that was really helpful to have that offered locally and for us to be able to attend. Finally, I just wanted to notify the board, we put in our newsletter and also in the Observer, the summer schedule for the school district will be 4 days per week, Monday through Thursday. School offices have varying hours. Those have been published as well. But the district office will be the Monday through Thursday. Will be, open from, employees are working from 7 to 5. Our published hours being open are 8 to 4. Any questions or requests for information from me?
Oh, no, okay. Next up, we'll do principal reports. I'll just point out that we have all gotten written copies and read the written copies, and it's already 7:30 at night. We're just hitting reports, so brevity would be appreciated, but say what you need to say. And we'll start with Reg.
Yeah, the students really in their written report covered a lot of stuff that was going on at the high school. I just want to at least publicly recognize our Windblade Challenge teams. I don't think we covered them last week, but we sent 5 teams to the Windblade Challenge and they all did well. They came in 1st, 3rd, 5th, 6th, 9th, beating schools like Bangor, Yarmouth, and so I was really pleased with that outcome. Do want to publicly recognize our May Students of the Month. Eli Ewer is our 9th grader from Orono. And our 10th grader is Sophia Bilodeau from Vesey. Grade 11 is Katina Broad from Glenburn. And our grade 12 is Cameron Dahl from Orono. Meredith mentioned the events coming up, baccalaureate, our underclass awards, graduation. We just finished up senior exams today. Underclass exams start next week. Briefly, over the last 3 or 4 months as a faculty, we've looked at, we use a self-assessment tool to determine kind of areas of growth around professional development for next year. We're going to focus on assessment practices, and so that'll be a theme throughout our PDs for next year. Want to recognize Johnson Maine graduate students. They were looking for just projects to spruce up Orono High School, and so they did paint the exterior entry doors into the main lobby. I feel like did a great job, really took it seriously, primed it, sanded it, taped it off, and so it's a big improvement in appearance. They also just included, the state has just started tracking chronically absent students, and I just thought it was interesting information around percentage at local high schools in comparison, and then I know there was an article in the paper yesterday that said 16% was the statewide rate, which includes all the schools in the state. And so I took out all the elementary and middle schools, and so the high school chronically absent rate is actually 21.9%. And so that's even higher than I think people would anticipate. So it's just, it's good data. I mean, anyway, I'll let you compare it and make observations, but that's it.
Great, thanks. And just for people who don't have the sheet in front of them, Orono is at 16.85%, which is the second lowest number out of the 8 neighboring districts. So I suppose room for improvement, but overall, good news.
Yeah.
Just one question, Reg. How is a chronically absent defined?
So truancy is based on unexcused absences, and so there's a way to track that. But chronic absenteeism is based on students missing 10% or more of schools, so it's about 17 or 18 days per year. But that's excused or unexcused. It doesn't matter. So whether you're missing it for a medical appointment or, so it's just, and if you miss more than half a day, the state considers that a day's absence. So if you miss 10% or more, you're considered chronically absent.
And so is there any way, given the fact that both excused and unexcused absences count as in this chronically absent measure, is there any way for us or the state to differentiate between kind of excused, perhaps legitimate absence, and unexcused, perhaps illegitimate absence, or is that just not?
I don't know if they I don't know if they could separate that.
We could.
We could, yeah. But I think we just report truancy and absences and an average daily attendance.
I'd be interested to know, just for our purposes, of this number here for us in terms of chronically absent, what percentage of our students are, of these chronically absent students, what percentage of that is excused absence versus unexcused? I mean, it's not like a pressing number, but at some point, if we
Yeah.
can see that, that'd be great.
Okay,
Thank you.
sure.
Next up, Heath.
Good evening. There are some new faces to me. My name is Heath Kenny. I'm the principal at the middle school. All right, I can make this brief. As you can see, I have some descriptions of some things I wanted to recognize. Once again, Susan Smith from the UMaine Art Department came out and worked with our Chapter 104 kids. Again, they are doing some remarkable things under Nancy Connor's leadership. So I did want to say that was very impressive. I also wanted to talk a little bit about the Milty conference that we had about 20 students go to. I have to thank Sean Malone. I'm not sure if he's still here, but he put that together, as well as did Emily Jackson-Sanborn, and I got to tag along. I think the one thing for me that really stood out that was very impressive is the what you guys I would call PD sessions, and it was set up just like any conference that we would go to as an adult, where students had multiple options to pick from, and they went on their own. So that was very impressive, and the students seemed to really enjoy that. We've already mentioned Seussical. We are looking forward to that performance. I know the students are as well. Moving down to curriculum. As you know, we've started our NOEA testing. We finished up math today. Tomorrow we're going to do reading, and then finally we're going to wrap up with science on Thursday. Very interested to see that data, start putting that together so I can share that with you and with my teachers. 2018, 2019 math assessments. I did want to share this. This is a little bit different than in years past. Orono Middle School, in years past, the students would come to school. Within the first week or two, they would take their math assessments. When I say math assessments, typically 4 or 5, that would help determine or determines what math class that they'll be in, what best suits their needs. This year, we've decided to do that at the end of the school year for a number of different reasons. One, I found being my first year, to start the school year, to know who your teachers are and to get in a nice routine is very important, especially for middle school students. So by doing this, students will be able to get their schedules during the summer break when we send the back to school packets. Darcy and I have already been talking. We've been reaching out to ASA staff and getting information for our incoming 5th graders. So we feel better prepared. With that being said, I want to make sure in our letter or in the packet sent home this summer to parents, although that we are doing our assessments now and we are placing them into math classes, students will still have the opportunity, if they've worked hard throughout the summer and they want to try for maybe a higher level math class, then they certainly can, and they can do retake those assessments when they come back from summer break. And finally, under professional development, last two department meetings and department head meetings, we've talked about one of the things we've talked about is professional development for next year. The teachers have come up with some very exciting topics that we're going to be diving into. And I can tell you, going into my 2nd year, that's very useful for me because I can start to pull some resources together. And now I know some teachers that are willing to come and help me out this summer so that we're ready for next year. Questions?
I don't have a question, just a comment. I'd like to thank you and your staff of teachers for moving the assessment to now before the end of the school year, and also for reaching out to the ASA administrator and teachers for their input. It never made sense to me why we didn't do that before. So I appreciate the fact that you're doing something that, in my opinion, we should have been doing all along. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. And Asa.
I'll keep it really quick. Just wanted to congratulate our 4th and 5th graders and our music team for the great performance, and thank everyone who submitted a response to the principal's evaluation survey. Though the feedback that we get from that helps us build goals for our school and for my own professional growth. So it's very much appreciated. The results for NUIAs will be going home with individuals and the report cards on the last day of school. We're still waiting on access to the district level data, but teachers are looking at their own classroom data as we speak, and things are looking pretty good so far. So, any questions?
No, thank you. Next up, we have students. I'll just give you the same prompt I gave the principals, that it's late at night, but say whatever you want to say.
For school culture, the 2018 yearbook was dedicated to Miss Moriarty and Mr. Joseph.
I also just wanted to mention Artsapalooza is coming up, in which like the show choir is performing, but also many individual students from the high school will have acts downtown Orono throughout that night. We just had a few smaller concerns we wanted to bring up. One of them being, we know the crossing guard was already mentioned, and it seems to have improved significantly at the Goodridge crossing. But as someone who walks to and from school almost every single day through the downtown crossing, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say there has not been a crossing guard more than half of the time in the morning, and also a significant chunk of the time in the afternoon still. I know it's something we're just looking at, but I just wanted to bring that to the attention.
You mean the improvements at the Westwood crossing?
Yeah, sorry,
Yeah.
Westwood, my bad, yeah.
Yep, noted, agreed.
Also, had a question about if the board packet is information that could be, in the high school, we have a weekly email that goes out, and if the board packet and board agenda is information that could be added to that. I know that's a question for the principal, but is that public information that could be sent out to the students?
The board agenda is absolutely public
We
information.
look at sending that to students so students know if something's on the agenda that they care about.
And parents who wish to listen to it.
Yeah, and parents too.
So the current policy is that we have a list, and anybody who wants to get on that list just has to send an email to the superintendent's office, to Ms. Gray currently, to get on the list. And then we do also send it, I think, to the teacher lists. And we send it to, there's a listserv, the Friends of Orono Schools. If you think it should be sent to the high school students, we could probably look into that. I don't know that we're going to send it to 800 parents, which is, we don't have a sub-list on that. So, but I would love it if more parents put their name on the list to get agendas on a regular basis as well.
I just know there's already a format of emails that go out of the high school, and that it would be great if we could add the board agenda to that list.
Yep, it and most of the documents are completely public documents.
Okay. Then one last thing.
So we've been doing some research on the idea of student evaluations of teachers, and we love to bring the concept to the board's attention. We think it'd be a valuable addition to the RSU 26 school community, and we'd be willing to present to the board in more depth next meeting if the board would like.
I don't think any reason we would ever say no to that. We've always wanted student concerns brought forward and would like to hear from students, so.
Okay, yeah, we'll bring a more in-depth review of what we've found.
So I'm just trying to think practically how full next week, 2 weeks is, and whether it would be better to do that or the first meeting in September. I think we were okay for, at least for a brief presentation. I mean, honestly, if that's going forward, it's going to be a long conversation, so maybe we should look at 2 weeks from now as a start for that conversation. Does that make sense?
So my suggestion, because we spoke about this, had been to have the student advisors present their research, because they really talked to me in general terms about the research they've done, but to share specifics with Ms. Brady and myself. Ms. Brady leads the supervision evaluation as a starting point, but if you would like to have it done in public session, that's certainly an option. I think it will be a long conversation, so I felt starting it at that point and having us to consider kind of where we see that information headed might be a good place to start.
No, that makes sense. Does that seem like a reasonable starting point?
We're open for either way. We just, at this point, have done research and would like to start presenting the idea and moving it forward, or
What
at
do
least
other board
moving it to
members think?
discussion.
Well, I think if in this instance, I think if Meredith's recommendation is for students to present their research to her and Sharon first, then I'm fine with that. Recognizing that this is the kind of the initial point of what's gonna be a really long process, that seems to me to be the logical place to start, and then kind of go from there, and also recognizing that unless there's something out there that we're not anticipating at the moment, the June 19th meeting will be it until, August, but then really for you guys, probably until we get into September. So I think that's the place to start for me.
Okay, does that seem like a good step forward? Great. Thank you for bringing that forward. Anything else? All right. Next up, we have all the reports. Next up is discussion item, class sizes at OHS for FY 18-19. Do you want to present? Or
Sure. So based on your request at the last board meeting, I asked Reg and the guidance team to put together a listing of our projected class sizes for the high school next year. And this really came in the context of, I think, your desire to look at this as we contemplate the new vacancy we have for the part-time English teacher at the high school. And so the data that's presented to you, and Reg, will you come up to the podium just so you can be up here? This is your data. The bottom presents this year's actual data, which is complete, fully populated classes. And you can see kind of by content area for first semester and then second semester, how those averages fell out this year. The top section is based on the current progress with scheduling for next year. When Reg and I talked yesterday, it was about 90% done.
Yeah.
Is it still?
Yes,
out
still
there?
about the same. So I would say it's not a projected, it's the currently, what our current schedule looks like. It's about 90%, so we haven't enrolled. I know our international students, our AFS, each guidance counselor has about 10 kids that they're juggling around. So there's maybe 30 kids that aren't scheduled yet. So, but it's about 90% complete. So, yeah. So I included this year as just for comparison to. There was obviously a completed schedule.
And I would say, when we talked about this data back during budget season, the information that you received for the high school wasn't this granular in terms of department comparisons. Right. It was more of just section totals. So this is more in-depth than you saw at that time. And there are some curious kind of trends emerging in this next year's numbers that Reg and I talked a little bit about to see if he had some ideas as to why the numbers seem to be emerging that way. But do you have any other explanations?
Well, I think you're talking about science is one. So the science department, I've included the computer science and technology classes in that department. It's our science and technology department. So so the science isn't just earth science, biochemistry, physics. It also includes the computer science, the robotics, the Python. So that's why those numbers are probably the highest on the list.
And the one thing that we do, I think we can say this, that all 30 students who are not currently enrolled will definitely all add an English class.
Right.
Because there are 4 credit requirements for that.
Yeah.
I mean, unless someone is an unusual circumstance, I think that's pretty much a given.
Right, yeah. And a math, probably.
But other than those two, it might vary pretty broadly.
Yeah.
So, I mean, in general, we were just talking about it in the workshop. We value small classes in this town, but we also have to balance that with fiscal reality and what we can afford. I looked through these with 6, 7 topics, and I could make a case in each of them why they benefit from having a smaller class. And in particular, I think of the world languages. We all know that there's some of the 4th, 5th, 6th-year classes, just by the structure of how students get there, are inherently going to be small, but we value offering those. But again, I could make a case in every one of these topics why small classes are good. Is there any particularly exceptional reason, like I just mentioned for foreign languages, why you think English classes should be, right now, they are at least for next year, the smallest of all 7 departments? Is there any particular reason why they have to be as small? Are there structural reasons like Spanish 6 that happen in English?
Well, I mean, I think 2 of the features of the English department are your real focus on writing and kind of a writing workshop model. And so smaller writing classes, allow the teacher to work one-on-one, give feedback. So the writing emphasis and the number of electives that we offer, I think are two of the real signatures of that department. And so there are some smaller sizes. I think those are 2 big reasons.
So, I mean, when Meredith and I set this up, I don't think we want to I think it would be too short a notice to take a decision, at least a decision not to fill the position. So I'm not necessarily looking, this is why it's a discussion, not an action, but I think it would be good to give everybody a sense, if we want to think about it like the Federal Reserve Board, right? There's indicators of where we're at going into the next meeting. And I think probably we should have another conversation next meeting, but are there any thoughts or first impressions that are not going to get set in stone tonight, but any thoughts or first impressions of where people are thinking about whether we can, obviously we want to add that position back in because there are lots of benefits, but whether we can justify adding that position back in or not?
Can I ask a question first before we discuss that? For the number of sections for 18, 19 in English, do those numbers count the sections that would be offered by that halftime person?
Yes.
Okay, so
Yeah.
so the only thing that's going to change here would be that each of the 30 or so students who are not currently enrolled are, unless there's some highly unusual circumstance, going to add 1 section of English each. Is that accurate?
No, the numbers of sections are set.
Right, but there's going to be 30 more students enrolled in English, more or less.
Want the math on that?
They're going to be 30 more in math too,
It's
and
12.4 instead of.
Okay.
It's 12.4 instead of the current number. I just did the math on
there'd be
that.
3 less sections, which would take it.
So that was my other question. If we didn't fill that, we take away 3 sections in
Right,
English.
yeah.
3.
Okay. And that brings it up to 14 students,
Just over, yeah.
which is essentially where we were last year.
When you
Or
account
this
for
year.
the low sections.
Right.
How'd you get 14? You adding 30 students in, and then
And then taking the
Right, 3 sections.
I guess I'm a little less inclined to add the 30 in just because we know they're going to go into math and some subset of, but I mean, there's more than one valid way to calculate it. But for apples to apples, yep. In the spring,
Right, because the math number, which is one of the highest, will likely go up, a couple of points with 30 additional students as
Yeah.
well.
Yep.
so by my quick calculation, yeah, so if you, reduce the sections but don't add the 30 students, English goes from being the smallest department to the second smallest department in terms of students per section. Right, it goes to 12.4 and 12.5. I guess, anybody else want to weigh in?
So what are you looking for from us, Brian? Just to,
Well, so, I mean, the real,
Do we want to continue the discussion? Is that basically what?
yeah, I mean, right, so the ultimate question, obviously, class numbers are interesting, but the ultimate question is, as you know, we replaced
right.
a full-time position with a half-time position, so
Right.
that creates a half-time position that's unfilled. We had a very difficult budget season where we spent a lot of time talking about positions. We ended up not having to cut filled positions, but we had a number of vacant positions that we actually cut because they.
We did cut one half-time social
Yeah,
studies.
right, yep. So it was a tough budget year, and there were a lot of positions we were unable to fill that we had anticipated filling. And, so the question is, and again, I don't want to take a decision tonight necessarily, but I think it would be good to just be honest about where we think we're heading,
So you want a sense of where we are at this point on that?
just to give people 2 weeks to think about it and react, because changing numbers of positions is a big deal.
Right.
Yeah, a sense of where we're at, and then we would take a decision after due reflection in 2 weeks is what I'm thinking.
Recognizing that there's still a lot of thinking to be done on this and a lot of discussion to be had on this. My sense at the moment would be, given the budget climate that we just came out of and the uncertainty surrounding next year, my leaning at this point would be to not fill it. But again, that's a preliminary position that could easily change given more discussion and thought over the next couple of weeks. But right now, that's the direction I'm leaning in.
I don't think there's any harm in moving forward with this discussion, taking it further.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, my initial feeling was that we wouldn't fill it, bring the class sizes a little bit more commensurate with all the others. And also, I feel like it's sometimes kind of hard to fill these half-time positions with a really great candidate. So that's my leaning right now.
I guess I would probably, most closely echo what Mark said. It's not that I don't want to fill it, but the current budget situation, we could be next year looking at cutting positions that are filled, and so it's very hard for me to take a unfilled position that means nobody would have to lose their job and fill that up so that it's going to turn into a position somebody has to lose when it's only taking class sizes up to 12.4. It's still an awfully good class size if you move around the state. So that's my first inclination. Nothing's decided. I think everybody needs a couple weeks. I don't like to make hasty decisions on this kind of magnitude, so nothing's decided, but I think that gives you a bit of a sense where we're headed.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add, given the conversation we had last week about recruitment, and we want to look at recruitment differently and emphasize recruitment. I'm concerned about the message it would send to, sending towns that, we're cutting teachers. We've cut a half-time social studies position. If we go ahead and don't fill this position, that won't go quietly, I don't believe. And so I think that will send a message that we don't want at this moment. I think we'll be able to probably have this conversation in a year. There's probably a retirement or two coming down the road that will allow us to look at it similarly next year, but just food for thought.
Fair enough. And just to be clear, what I'm just looking at this, if we fill it, it's basically, I mean, your point about retirements are fair enough, but if we fill it, it's basically a decision for a number of years until a retirement shows up again. If we don't fill it, it's a one-year decision as far as I'm concerned. It's something we can always revisit in a year. All right, anything else you want out of this, Meredith? No, okay. All right, that's it for the discussion. We'll move on to action items. We've already done the staff nominations. No co-curriculars? No. Okay. Board meeting dates. We got a draft of this last. What's that? No, the section D I got moved to the end. So board meeting dates, we have a draft calendar of meeting dates. We recognize that things may change. I think we had even identified a couple regions where things might change. But we do typically approve our board meeting dates at this time of the year for the coming year, and we can change them as needed. So I will make a motion to adopt the dates presented. believe in every case except, well, yeah, I'm not going to read the dates off. It's usually the first and third Thursday, but we deviate from that in several dates. Sorry, first and third Tuesday. But it looks to me like we deviate from that in December, January, because we don't want to meet on New Year's, and April because of vacation. So those would be the deviations from the practice of first and third Tuesdays. So I will make a motion to adopt these as our intended meeting dates as presented. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? Anybody want more dates? Okay. All those in favor as presented? Okay. Next up, we have acceptance of donations. We have two of them. We added one to the agenda here.
Yeah, so I believe Stacy's here to just speak briefly about this. If you want to come up to the podium, Stacy. Stacy Newman is the PTO president down at ASA, and she contacted me about a donation that they want to make to the kitchen. So just if you want to briefly fill the board in.
The PTO had a request from our kitchen staff down at ASA to buy a proofer or warmer. And they stated very eloquently in their letter how it could benefit all of the students at ASA because it would allow them not only to make more homemade breads and rolls and things for students' lunches and breakfast, but it would also keep warm and hot lunches. It would make things not dry out. So by the time the fourth graders eat lunch, which is the latest lunch of the day, hamburgers and things are kind of dried out and they're often cold. If they have a proofer or a warmer similar to what they have at the high school, that food could be kept more moist and warm so that every student got a hot meal. So the cost of the proofer is $1,200. ASA PTO got a $500 donation from a very generous family toward the cost of that. So PTO would be putting in the other $700 for the cost, and we're asking for board approval.
So I would make a motion for the board to approve a $1,200 donation from the two sources just mentioned. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Is there any discussion or questions?
Thank you.
Just to note that our approval, which I assume is forthcoming, is with great gratitude to both the individual and to the PTO.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. All those in favor? Great.
Thank you, Stacy.
And we have another grant.
Yes, so we had an additional submission to the Orno Education Foundation from the speech and debate team. They were seeking support to attend the national tournament, and the OEF has approved their request in the amount of $500. So we need your approval to receive these funds in order to disperse them on behalf of the OEF.
So I will make a motion. Full disclosure, I'm part of the OEF committee, but I will make a motion to approve the acceptance of $500 from the OEF towards the speech and debate trip. Is there a second?
I will second.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Okay, great. Next up are policies. So we have our longest policy, GCF, which is coming up for a first read. It looks like, well, yeah, I'm pulling out the pages here. Definitely our longest policy.
I think it's 16.
It reads as 16 electronically, but it's 16 pages tonight, so it's really only 15.
This is the one-stop shop policy on hiring. And right now, so the policy was passed last year, and it applied to hiring teaching staff, which includes some things like librarians and other things that school counselors that are not always necessarily called teachers, instructional staff, and it also applied to hiring administrators. And we had the overall policy GCF, which established that we would do this in a non-discriminatory process, and that the board was responsible for ensuring that there was a non-discriminatory process. We had policy GCF-R, which was the extended regulation that was developed in quite a bit of detail with our lawyer about what a non-discriminatory process looks like. And then we had GCF-AR, which was details on specific to hiring of instructional staff. and GCF-BR, which is specific to hiring of administrative staff. Major changes are that we have now extended this policy. We had no policy or clarity on hiring of support staff, and we kind of have treated support staff in two sections. One is the support staff covered by the collective bargaining agreement, so those would include things like ed techs, janitors, food kitchen workers, those types of categories. And then we also have central office staff, which are direct reports to the superintendent and are not collectively bargained for. They have individual contracts. Just skimming through the red highlighted stuff here, the next paragraph, this policy, that's just the roadmap to the 5 policies I gave you. Responsibilities for this policy, few words here and there that clarify things, but nothing really changing in the main policy. Big change to GCFR. Again, the red ink up at the top is just making it clear who goes where. The authorization to initiate a hiring process, this has always been unclear. I've had 2 new superintendents in a row ask me, so can I run a job ad? And there was never any practice or policy around that. This sets one up. Basically, if it's a mid-year replacement, if there's a vacancy for something that's in the adopted budget, whether it's already existing position or a new position in the budget, there's a authorization to begin the process. The superintendent doesn't have to come to the board to start the hire. The one exception is if there is something not in the budget that needs to be hired. And I think the most recent example of that is we had to hire several people in a foreign language or English language instruction and in the SPED area last fall in the middle of the semester. So that would be an example of something that would, and in that case, did have to come to the board. So under 1 to 3, the superintendent just starts. Under 4, it comes to the board first. And then we have the process, which again was developed with our lawyer, and it represents best practices, A, for non-discriminatory hires, but B, I think also for just a good hiring process that taps into the talents and diverse skills in this district. No big changes, just a clarification that a job description or a job ad will be sent to the board. That's kind of our notice that the hiring process has started. No big changes. And then the language on hiring of current employees was mistakenly left to only apply to administrators. It was intended, internal hires. It was intended to apply also to all the other positions. So now we have clarifying language on internal hires. I'm now on GCF-AR. Only change is to make it explicit that it's allowable to have a board member on a search committee. It was never disallowed, but I'd heard diverse opinions about whether it was allowed or not allowed. It's specifically allowed. It is not in any way required or stated as expected. It's just added to the list of categories. GCF-BR hasn't changed. GCF-CR is the hiring of collective bargaining support staff. That's intended to be a fairly lightweight process in terms of the size of the search committees. This is also a group that does not have to come to the board for approval. So this is the superintendent as the final step for hiring. So this was not an intention to change the process. It was just an intention to put in policy the existing process. GCF-DR is the central office staff. There we kind of draw a distinction between central office staff who interact with the board, business manager, facilities manager, a couple of other categories down at the bottom, administrative assistant to the superintendent. And those have a little bit more. Those are approved by the board. The others are directly hired by the superintendent. But all of this, of course, is, ties back into the rest of the policy, which requires that it be in the budget and the board be notified along the way and so forth. So that is 15 pages, looks like a lot of red ink. Really, mostly, we've tweaked a few things here and there, which I tried to highlight. Mostly what we've done is we've just brought every employee in the district that is a part-time or full-time employee, i.e. not a stipend, under one policy. So I guess I'll make the motion and then we can have a discussion. So I move to recognize a first read on policy GCF and associated policies GCF, GCF-R, GCF-AR, GCF-BR, GCF-CR, and GCF-DR. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, discussion, questions, comments? This has been through the policy subcommittee in some detail, but obviously, questions and comments welcome. No? Too heavy to even read? Okay, no, it has gotten a lot of scrutiny, and it's actually not as big a change as it looks. Okay, so all those in favor, this will come back in 2 weeks. All those in favor of recognizing the first read? Okay. Next up, apologies, this was not on the initial agenda. That was my fault. Policy GE pertaining to stipends. This has been read once at the board already. This has been discussed in policy subcommittee twice. I did also have a meeting with Shauna on the side. None of this is intended to be a change particularly to how we are doing stipended positions, but there is no policy in place on stipends. General expectations. Obviously, everything in here is consistent with the stipend, the CBA, collective bargaining language on stipends. Stipends are for a single year, require a contract, so they're considered employees. Sue Bell maintains a master list of every stipended position and the current point rating, which drives the dollars. To create a new position, it has to come to the board for approval, and it also, if it's a new category of position, not an existing category, it would also go to the stipend committee to rate it for points. One exception is if we require a teacher mentor, that doesn't need to come to the board, that can just be filled as needed. The other thing we did is we tried to draw a distinction between the really, I would call them major, large stipend positions, which are more than $4,000. Those are primarily varsity coaches, including some things like cheerleading at the high school and the music show choir, I think, and the musical show director, and 1 or 2 other positions. So it's about a dozen positions that meet that $4,000 threshold, and those need to go through a more detailed process of having a search committee and advertising, and then coming to the board for approval. The rest of them will just go in an individual discussion context. The rest of them will come forward to the board as a slate, as they have been doing for quite a while. Could be 10 or 15 in a slate. And that increased process is only if there's a vacant position. It's not for a reappointment of an existing basketball coach, softball coach, et cetera. And then the last thing, we make it explicit that principals are supposed to make sure that there's a need for the stipend each year and that the individual fulfilling it is adequate. And we have set up the notion of a trial stipend. This came forth out of the stipend committee. Jake presented that a month ago. And everybody thought that was a really good idea to formalize that. So we will pay them $250. They will sign a contract. They will be bound by all of our policies and laws and security checks. And it will be abundantly clear to everybody that it's a temporary 1-year position. And then it will have to either become permanent or not permanent. And typically will be fed into the budget discussion for the coming year. So that's the policy. I don't think I made a motion already, did I? So I will make a motion to adopt this policy. It's a second read, to adopt this policy as presented. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion on this policy?
I just want to offer one point of clarification that even though many of these stipend positions that are not the quote-unquote major stipend positions will come forward as a slate, as they generally do, we will still obviously retain the option of taking action on them individually if we so choose to. That hasn't changed.
Correct, and that's actually explicitly in the policy.
For some reason, why is it in my head that I thought and I guess I'll look up at Shauna, wasn't the trial year? I don't remember $250 stipend for the trial year. I thought it was on a volunteer basis.
It was added by the policy subcommittee. We wanted them to be an employee so that they'd be bound by security checks and all that kind of stuff.
That was the tiny thought in the back of my head.
Yeah.
And we're happy with people being generous.
I didn't think anybody was going to complain. And
No, I just wanted to make sure that my memory was correct. And
You're right. You're right.
Got it.
Yeah, and
No, yep, I know.
can't hurt. It's good.
Yes.
Good legally, and
Yes.
can't hurt to at least say thank you, even if it's a token.
Yes.
Any other discussion? Okay, all those in favor? Any votes? Okay. All right. We are in, so it is after 8 o'clock. I would release all the student reps. You're welcome to stay. We just have a couple reports and then we're going into executive session. But it's after 8 o'clock and we know you have lots of things on your plate. So you're welcome to leave.
Is there anything specifically coming up on the subcommittee reports?
Nothing that's
Nothing
overly
big,
exciting.
no.
Okay.
Policy Subcommittee, we don't have another meeting scheduled. We have one policy that's here. I do think, in light of what we discussed about the transgender issue, if the Policy Subcommittee is the right place, we may special schedule a meeting towards the end of school or after school. I'll have to speak with Meredith about that, but
I would think we should do that.
yep. Well, we should definitely address the issues. If we think Policy Subcommittee is the first place to do it, we need to have a meeting. Other than that, there's no plans, and there's just the one policy that's coming up for a second read. UTC.
We haven't had a meeting, but from what we discussed here tonight, I would actually like to bring up at their next meeting and email them about using preferred names also, and have them learn from the things that we've had here. So I'll be sending them an email this week to talk to them.
Great. Spruce.
Our next meeting is not until the fall.
Good. Curriculum Subcommittee.
After even explicitly saying I was going to be at that meeting, the next day I realized about 4:45 that I had not made the meeting, so I am unable to give that report, so I'll leave it to the two of you.
I was there. I can try, and then Meredith can fill in. As I recall, there was a textbook approval for AP Physics, and we got an update from ASA about their work on the science curriculum and the health curriculum, which they've done lots of robust work and discussion, and I was excited to see both of those documents laid out in detail. And I think probably the biggest conversation was about schedule alignments, and I think it's a fairly positive move. We discussed this in the workshop in the first meeting. OMS in particular is now going to effectively a maroon white day. It won't affect the students for any of their regular topics, but for some of the specials, like world languages and art, it will. And that it has a considerable benefit that it has a benefit for the students because it makes it easier for them to move back and forth between the middle school and the high school. If students want to take a class, middle school student wants to take a class at the high school, it means that they're now going to be much more aligned schedule-wise. Has a benefit from the district and from the staff point of view for efficiency, and that it makes it much easier to schedule staff back and forth. There's shared staff across the buildings. And ASA is, I think, still working through the details. If Darcy can correct me if I'm wrong, but if I'm remembering, they're thinking maybe about a 6-day rotation on the specials, which, since 6 is a multiple of 2, would also then line up with a maroon-white schedule as well. So I think this has been on board goals for a couple of years. I think that's a really exciting fact that there's now this alignment across the buildings. It's good for the staff, but it's also obviously great for the students as well. Out of that, that kind of a change, of course, has changes that are involved. We talked through the changes in particular to fine arts at the middle school and to world languages at the middle school. We can go into more detail if people want, but I would say the net summary is art's not particularly reconfigured at all, but the world languages is reconfigured a bit with a number. It is going to be slightly reduced for 7th graders, but there are a number of other benefits in the sense that students will get to pick one language earlier. We'll have more sustainable model for getting language K through 5. And we'll also have a clear path in terms of Spanish or French. There will be choices earlier, and students will be able to get deeper instruction through the total career of the middle school. And we'll also have a clear path for students who want to track Spanish in the middle school to take Spanish 1 at the high school, or want to track to take Spanish 2 at the high school per student choice. And also teacher assessment, but definitely student choice considered in that. So I think the net is there's some changes to the world languages to make that schedule work, but mostly the world language teachers seemed happy with it. They thought it was constructive and good for pedagogy, and I think that schedule alignment's going to be a big win. It's something this district's been missing for a while. Anything I missed on?
Very complete summary.
Okay. Facilities, I think you got that in your report. One more meeting in the facilities committee meeting. We're going to take everything that the PDT has given us and try and start getting a handle on prioritization. It's a diamond process, right? You're listing everything you want to do, and that list gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and then you have to turn it around and scope it down to what you can actually do, and we're right at the corners of the diamond right now. So that, in fact, between last night and 2 weeks from last night, that's the turning of the corners. Although there's still some things coming out from PDT as well. Wellness Subcommittee, I don't think we have a report. Any other business? Any future agenda items? Any public comment tonight? It's going at the very end, after 14.
Hello, Shauna Goodall, Orono Education Association. We've got our new charter for our new name, so we're going to use it. That's not what I'm here to talk about. I just wanted to talk a little bit about enrollment numbers and totally unscientific data of my freshmen getting schedules, and I only have a subset of the Orono High School population. I teach mainly freshmen. And the amount of changes that they're doing. And this is all, what word of mouth data. Like, it's late. I'm sorry, I don't have the specific data. It's not numbers. It's all talk. Anecdotal. Thank you. Sorry, it's it's late. Anecdotal, but my two my classes that I surveyed, like the majority of them are changing their schedules, and I know this causes us to tear our hair out because we wish that they would not change their schedules and change their enrollment numbers. But the culture, from how I see it at Orono High School, is that the kids change their schedules. They sign up for one thing and then they change. Hopefully in 2 weeks when you are discussing the English position and enrollment numbers again, we have much more solid numbers. But they're very much in flux right now. And so I think we need to keep that in mind. I know that students are changing classes because of changes in instructors. They're changing classes because they want to have Block 4 as a study hall. Just don't get me started on that one. They want to start the day with a study hall. All sorts of variety of reasons why students change classes. And right now, any of those numbers I just feel are not numbers that are solid. So I guess that's something we need to think about when we're making those decisions. Historic numbers, different story, but the numbers right now, I wish they were solid, but we're dealing with teenagers who sometimes make these interesting academic decisions.
Thanks. Just a quick question.
Yes.
So hearing that the numbers are approximate and in flux, any reason to think they're strongly biased, that every single student who's changing is going to change up their number of English sections, or any reason to think the numbers are particularly biased on any of these areas?
I don't know. It's hard to say. I don't delve into the data. I just know that oftentimes when I, in social studies, get my list in the spring, like I do now, and so let's use AP Government and Politics, a class that I've picked up for next year. Right now I'm enrolled with 7. I think I'll probably be enrolled with 7 or 10 or maybe 12, hopefully. I mean, that would be great. I'm really excited about that class. I'm going to come talking to you, Mr. Brewer. It could honestly be enrolled with 12 different kids next fall. Completely different kids who have not done the summer work. And that's what happened with me this year with AP World History. I had 14 kids enrolled in the spring. I gave them out their summer work, and I had 7 of those change come when they showed up to my class in the fall. And I don't know.
Yep.
So it's just.
They're in flux.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
So.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Jim Bulteel, Orono High School English. Just want to comment on the discussion that's coming up about the English department job, and primarily the points that you made, which were preliminary points, as you said, were about pay and about having someone who might be brought on this year and then dismissed next year, or keeping a job open and so on. What I wanted to draw to your attention was the academic impact that this proposal might have if it were to go through. Mr. Rulin mentions that the registration is 90% complete, which is I'm sure is true, but that's not the same as saying it's stable, and that's a point that Shana has just been making. And I would certainly reiterate what Shana is saying, that the numbers that you're getting right now are just nowhere near stable. I've had, over the course of 1 year, I've had classes go from 16 or 17 down to 5, or in reverse. Over the course of 3 years, to take my British Children's Lit class, for example, I've had a couple of years of 2 sections, and then this year I've got currently 8 kids enrolled total. So over a 3-year period, you're going to see a very different pattern, to compare it to the numbers that you have right now, and even over the next 3-month period, you're going to see probably, at least for some classes, a fairly substantial variation in those numbers. Even if the total numbers come out the same, it could easily be, though this is a slightly different story, that I'll have a whole new different set of kids in that class once add drop is completed, and of course that doesn't happen until the first week of September. So it's very hard for anyone to say with any clarity, I think, at this point, what any English elective number would be. So that's one impact. Second impact would be that if the job disappeared at this late stage in the planning, the master schedule's in there, it is 90% populated. If that half-time job were to disappear, that's an awful lot of English classes which are going to disappear. We've run a couple of mock schedules. It could be 5 or 6 electives that would go. And that means that the kids in those electives, which would not always be the low-populated electives, just because of the way different teachers teach different electives and how we'd have to move or shift around classes between those teachers, it could mean a substantial number of students who'd get moved around, which would mean further knock-on effects on the master schedule as a whole, which is very nearly set. Students have been given next year's first semester schedules already. Substantial number of those would have to get changed, I imagine. That's obviously something that guidance could be more informative about than I could. So we've just made changes to freshman English, added a section. We're really focusing next year on having a somewhat smaller section. I think the number is about 10 on average per section at the moment. The idea is to focus on writing in a conference style. You've just hired Erica as a full-time teacher, and she's bringing in some composition skills from the university. We're trying to make sure that those get fully developed. She's already working on those for freshman English. We're also going to be doing looking at a portfolio system based on the university system for XPOS, if we have the capacity to do that. By my estimate, depending on how we move stuff around, we may have to give up 5 or 6 electives. Another possibility is we'll give up one of our AP classes and do that on a rotating basis. So I do AP Lit, Erica's doing AP Lang. It may be that we'll do AP Lang next year, we'll drop AP Lit, and then I'll do AP Lit the following year, so we have 1 but not 2 AP classes in the English department at any time. That's a possibility. It's one way we could make some of those changes. I want to get to the comment about half-time teachers and how hard it is to find them. Both Erica and I were half-time teachers. I can't speak for myself. Erica is a superb teacher, and they're here in the community. It's easy to find them. Not easy. They're there. We're interested. We love the job. It's a good school. I think you've got a better chance than many places of finding a half-time English teacher. Final point, I just wonder about the nature of this fairly substantial change that you're making to a department that's done pretty well for the school over, since it's had electives back in 1960, which is when we began having elective systems. And the public has not heard about this proposal, and typically that would be something that I think you probably hear a fair amount from the public if it were to come up during the course of the actual budget discussions that the public has available. The vote hasn't happened yet, I believe, but the public comment section has been and gone. So it could come as a surprise, I think, for the Orono community to discover at this stage that a teaching job is disappearing. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other public comment? All right. Next meetings, June 19th, 2018, 2 weeks from tonight. Here in the Orono Town Council chambers, we will have a workshop on student data at 5 p.m. That will not be broadcast. And then at the regular time, 6 p.m. here in the Town Council chambers on June 19th, we will have a regularly scheduled meeting. It will be the last scheduled meeting until August. We will also, any requests for information or follow-up? No. Okay, at this point, I will make, so that concludes most of the meeting except for 2 executive sessions. At this point, I will make a motion to go into executive session under 1-4056A, discussion of employee compensation. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?